for the actual world. For example, small things like falling leaves, all the way up to big things like creating a massive crater in the ground. Um, the latter side, yes. The individual things like falling leaves that don't actually affect gameplay. The goal is to run those client side entirely. Because like we only go to the server for things that matter for gameplay,
Right.
and
if the leaf on Ender's client falls to the left and the leaf on my client falls to the right, that's not going to have a huge gameplay impact. It doesn't really matter.
now we have physics on the client and the server, and some of the things like cloth animation, for instance, is a definite place for physics to go
Right.
on the client side.
Jack to Black, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Could you maybe rephrase it?
Is that knockback question?
Yeah.
So I think what he's asking is if I'm standing here and I'm in the front and you're behind me and I get knocked back, will you stop me from being knocked back?
As in, if one person is in an ongoing knockback state, would that cause player-to-player same realm collision to apply? Is the general question that I'm thinking.
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean,
and again, that is one of the limited cases where we're looking at turning it back on.
Right.
But
I mean, one of the possibilities we might have is we might not have solid collision, like you run up against another realm mate and you can't pass through them. We might have it so that that you slow down, so there's some resistance to that, so that would slow people down. I mean, in the case like if you're fighting with your back to the wall and you get hit with a knockback ability, you might take some damage from being knocked against the wall, but you might be able to keep your position easier. I mean, that's an easy, quite easier question to answer. But again, how specific friendly realm collision works. That's something we're going to have to work out. There's some places where you want, there's some places where you don't. We're going to have to figure out a good compromise.
Yeah. So I was a huge fan of being a Lurking tank in Dayak. It seems like physics might make that a really bad idea in CU. Will there be any advantage to being a Lukerpan tank in CU? Any advantage to being small?
Harder to hit with projectiles.
Yeah, there is certainly the evasion tank possibility as a role, where you are drawing hits, but most of the hits aren't hitting you. Of course, the downside is that because projectiles are a real thing in the world, then if they don't hit you, they are going to hit something else.
Well, and also take into account that in Camelot Unchained, as of right now, tank encompasses a larger envelope of character capabilities and role than just like damage sponge. Tank is also our melee DPS, so you could absolutely be a Lutrapan melee DPS that won't take as many hits and could be more of a scrapper and less of a meat shield.
Right, but again, it does come back to foundational principle number, was it 2? I think of just choices matter,
yeah.
And the thing you choose, the character you choose to play is who you are, and there will be positive and negative implications for that, more so than in most games.
And a Fearbulg will have a much harder time defending your little Lutrapan house. Like, yes, there are definitely some drawbacks for being a Lutrapan tank. There will also be some advantages, and it depends on whether or not that fits your place.
I'm out of combat and I'm inside someone else of my realm. Suddenly we enter combat. What happens? Well, I can actually sketch out the physics for you. There is a tiny line separating your position and theirs. I guarantee you, you're not exactly in the same position. Any movement that is away from each other's centers will take. You'll be able to move in that direction freely. Any movement that is towards the other person's center will be treated as a collision. So you're going, unless you are absolutely perfect at moving perfectly in sync, then you're going to find yourself working your way out of one another. That's how it works right now. So, yay math. Any word on mounted combat? Mounted combat is not really in the cards for launch at all. I won't rule it out for 2 years after launch, but we do have to focus on what is the core game at launch. again, subscribe, stay subscribed. Much like the Viking Mariner expansion, I really want to do that.
Pacamos physics allows us to have projectiles that can go different ranges. So in that regard, yes, but the range of archery will probably be more dependent on the stats of your characters. Like you said, strong versus weak, or the bow that you're using.
Right. Will mass be an option at character creation? Size will be an option. Mass
race will be an option.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, race drives size, but in terms of, well, I want to be this size, but I'm going to turn my mass higher or lower. No, you know, there's not a character creation slider for whether you are filled with lead or feathers.
Yeah, that's the race choice. I guarantee you, Diverger is going to weigh more than most Vikings.
Right.
No mounts at launch.
Will momentum transfer, say, when hitting a Lucrepan with the catapulted rock, flinging a dead body, and he gets hit and he bounces back, and yes.
You know, and the rock will probably lose some of its momentum when it slams into him.
So you could fill a choke point with 30 frost giants when there should only be room for 10. I smell an AoE attack.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome place to be throwing nukes. Shoot arrows over keep walls, definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about a volley skill for archers of.
Right. Where you can. I mean, you know, currently we have it so that if you're trying to get a projectile between 2 points, there's a low arc and a high arc, and we've figured both of those out. Rob has figured both of those out. Doing a lot of hard work.
Somebody asked about catapulting players earlier. Even if that was something we let you do, fall damage would probably not be in your best interest.
Although, if you got it absolutely perfectly so that the apex of the arc where your vertical velocity is just about 0 was just as you were clearing the wall of the keep.
Or maybe if you had wings.
And, I guarantee you there is going to be, players are going to find a way to do that.
Right.
Yeah. It's the fun of physics, emergent gameplay.
Yes.
Players will try. They will definitely try.
But if you miss.
If you miss, we'll laugh at you. And that gets back to just, why having this kind of emergent type of thing is like, it generates stories within the game.
Right.
It's not just, yes, I did this many points of damage to him, he did this many points to me, I won. There is a story there.
Arrow B asking a question, my wind mage deflect your fireball. Will a fireball consider my attack for damage decisions? Again, that kind of depends on the design.
Yeah,
we're definitely working on that. That's been the discussion we've been having.
What would be the advantage of making a giant or fat healer being tougher to knock back?
Right.
Possibly more hit points.
More hit points, better view of the battlefield.
Right. I mean, each race is going to have its own, advantages and disadvantages you're going to have to consider carefully.
Not saying a giant target is the ideal healer, but there are advantages.
But they can heal themselves at least, right?
Yeah.
McCavity, MJ has said weather will affect combat, wind, veil storms, pushing spells and arrows around. I'm going to go with yes on wind, actually mattering.
Yeah.
And rain making the ground slippery, also yes. Those are not in yet, but that's definitely a goal.
I believe I heard a Q&A from MJ last night saying that climbing walls was probably going to be a thing.
Yeah, I think so. Will damage from hits be based on momentum due to physics, size of weapon? All right, I'm just going to go to the bottom. This is scrolling off too fast.
Yes, we answered your question about Lutrapan tanks. If you missed it, this video should be up on YouTube later.
Is there going to be... that's asking class balance questions.
Question, a friendly fire, Lucrepan wield one-handed sword, same as a normal player that wields a two-handed sword. Again, kind of depends on design decisions. What makes sense. I know that we've talked about weapons are going to have range. So if you want to, if you're a Lugerpan, you want to hit things further away, you're probably going to want to wield a larger weapon. That's probably going to require more strength. But that's only marginally kind of related to the physics system.
Yeah. Will there be friendly fire using physics, like getting a friendly arrow while running in a battlefield? The basic case of I just shoot Tim in the back. That's almost certainly not there. Again, 99.9% of you are awesome. There's that 0.1% where we just have to design assuming creepers and spies and so on, and harden the game against that. On the other hand, where it might come into play, say it was something very unintentional, like an arrow bounced off of something, and meanwhile Tim got knocked back, and neither one of them was on a trajectory that had been initially chosen, and then the arrow and Tim collided. That might get into a case where, okay, yes, this dynamic event happened. But,
so yeah, the long and short of that is there's maybe a possibility where you as my enemy could knock me into one of my friend's attacks.
But at the same time, just the straight up, I shoot Tim in the back. I can just about guarantee that's not going to be a thing that we let happen.
And another thing to consider is, if your side's, using catapults to pitch rocks into the battle, you may not be wanting to be, too far ahead of the line where the catapults are aiming at. There's going to be certain things that we definitely want to take into consideration. We don't want the griefers, we don't want that 0.1%. But, on the other hand, we don't want, catapults firing rocks and then people running, your allies running through the rocks to go attack people.
Yeah. Right. What about people who aren't running NVIDIA hardware? Will this be extremely taxing? The answer is that the major physics push is happening on the server, which is our hardware. We go out, we buy it, we use the hardware that's going to make our server run the best. And client side, we're doing a much smaller physics simulation of just the area immediately around you, and everything else just does what the server says happened. So you see a little more latency beyond 100 meters or whatever, but the big push for physics and hardware demands are on the server. So that's our problem. That's our solution too.
Right.
And there's more talk about that in the interview between Andrew, Mark, and Nate from NVIDIA. So check that out on YouTube if you're interested in it.
If I shoot an arrow down a hill, will physics allow it to go faster and further to do more damage? Yes. Actually, I can't say more damage. I won't say more damage necessarily. But in terms of longer range for people firing from height, then that's in now. That's happening.
That's how gravity works. Yeah.
The calculations for that are already just based on, say you have some initial velocity, can it reach this point or not, is going to be different based on where you are and what you're trying to hit.
Let's see. Due to the increased mass of giants, would this mean that physics would multiply the effects of their swings? We're not doing physics at the level of simulating my individual acts. There is a certain amount of when you get into that level of detail, like there's a reason that there aren't any like straight up Street Fighter fighting game MMOs. Latency there is just, it's too tight.
Right.
The internet hasn't caught up to that. I'm sure we're going to be making that in 10, 15 years. No question on that. But right now, we're not actually simulating my Xwing as a physics object that has to be synced across the world.
Yes, position up or down will affect the range of spells and arrows.
Yeah. This will be a 3D game.
Can players pull enemies off of battlements to their position on the ground? We're talking about pulls. I don't think we've made a decision. There's good and there's bad.
I would say, though, if pulls are in there, lighter players would be easier to pull than harder players, or than bigger, heavier players. Probably. Will veil storms affect gravity so projectiles will act strange? That's a cool idea.